Calliope's Tale by FalcomRenolds. Chapter 8. Baruni Hakir. The claw marks from the serpent healed remarkably quickly into a set of raised, pale scars that streaked across Calliope's back and shoulders. She took pride in them. They took the serpent to the largest port in the area, Baruni Hakir, and found someone who could make use of it, someone willing to buy the entire thing and disassemble it. Iante turned to the rail as they neared the port and pulled out her spyglass to scan the docked ships. If there were any crown ships, she wanted to know beforehand. Her gaze roamed over the gathered boats. She saw the tattered sails of ancient frigates, the crisp white of new sails draped on the fancy pleasure boats, and... her breath caught. She saw the gray-white sail, the massive tear through it, currently being patched by the crawling forms of lethargic crew. Even though she knew what it would say, she still panned the spyglass down to see the name painted on the hull. Heretic. Iante nearly dropped her spyglass, fear clutching at her heart. Shit, she muttered, and whirled, running for Makullo's quarters. She burst in, cracking the door against the wall. "Win," she said, stopping where she was and holding the door open. "He's here." Makullo was sitting at his desk, writing something. He stopped and looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Who?" he asked. "Alizarin." He paused, considering this. "All right," he said, and tapped a finger on his jaw. "Well, just to start, we know at least he can't hurt you. The neutrality is something not even he would violate." "It's not me I'm worried about," Ianthe snapped, interrupting him. "It's Calliope." There was a brief silence. Makullo went pale. "The treaty protects her," he said. Ianthe shook her head. "No, it doesn't. It protects the sailors and the wanderers of the sea. She's not one of those. She's a creature of the deeps, and while you can argue she is a wanderer, Alizarin will use that loophole before we get a chance to protect her. She cannot be found by him. He will try to kill her. I know it." She paused. "Her soul would be powerful." Makullo shut his mouth and swallowed. "Oh," he said. "We need to bring her on board and send her to safety." "Oh, we need to bring her on board or send her to safety." "Where is she now?" "Outside in the bay." "Get her here before we make port, then." Ianthe spun and hurried back out to the deck and railing. "Calliope!" she bellowed, leaning over the rail on the side of the ship facing away from the docks. "Come up." Silence. The brilliant blue water rippled gently beneath the boat. "I know you're down there," she called, narrowing her eyes. "It's important. Come on." Moments later, Calliope surfaced, bobbing next to the ship. Her dark skin glittered in the sunlight, the shapes of the kraken tendrils curling over her rounded shoulders and soft arms. "What is it?" she asked, looking more annoyed than anything. "The harbor is too dangerous for you to be freely swimming in," Ianthe told her. "You have to come on board." "On board?" Ianthe relented. "That, or you have to leave the bay for a while, and you can't come near us again until we leave." "Why?" "There are those in the port that would do harm if they knew of you." Calliope squinted. "Who?" Ianthe glared at her. Fine. I'll come up. How long will we be there?" "A few days, perhaps." "Oh, never mind. I changed my mind. I'll go outside." Ianthe paused, nervous. "Are you certain?" she said. "I'll be fine. Besides, you want me to be safe. It's best for me to get out of here." All right. Be careful." "Yes, Mother, I always am," Calliope said, rolling her eyes. Ianthe stared as Calliope slipped under the water's surface and shot away over the sand, a blur of dark that vanished into the oil-painting background of the ocean's bottom. "Mother?" She shook her head, but couldn't help but smile. Baruni Hakir was a massive port, ruled by three sisters who collectively owned every single business and building in the city. It was a meeting place of the fleets of the world, a sprawling expanse of buildings, inns, taverns, businesses, storefronts, homes, built over a sand and silt delta speckled with broadleaf trees. The docks sprawled through the shallow waters, snaking back and forth over the sandbanks. There were hundreds of thousands of people from every port on the planet here. She could go an entire month walking the sunny streets without meeting the same person twice. It only took a few hours for her to bump into Alizarin. He was lounging in a bar when she strode in. At the sight of him, she almost faltered, but kept her steps even and her head high. She would not be swayed by him in a place where he could not hurt her. Alizarin cocked his head to the side, catching sight of her. "Hello," he said, speaking through a mouth stuffed full. He wasn't eating. "Alizarin," she said, carefully keeping her eyes away from his face. "Well met." He laughed strangely, with his jaw tight. "Well met indeed," he said. "Our last encounter was not so fortuitous for either of us." "Perhaps not," she said carefully, making eye contact with the bartender. The last blinked slowly, acknowledging there was a rivalry here, and she was prepared to defuse the situation should any violence begin to rise. Rivalry violence was not permitted in Baruni Hakir. "Tell me, where did you learn that little trick of yours?" "I don't know what you mean." "You took some of my storm," he murmured, leaning forward and bracing his head on his chin. "I know you can do it. But how did you also take the sea?" She almost laughed. He was still thinking about her ship's escape from his out in the storm. In her thoughts of Calliope, she'd almost forgotten about that entire event. "I did not take the sea," Ianthe lied, tapping her fingers on the polished wood of the bar. She looked down and waited while the bartender prepared her a drink. "I cannot. You know this." "Not while you channel one, no. But you're capable of it." Ianthe only shrugged. She'd come to this bar to meet with an old friend she'd made here some years back, but she was likely going to have to cut that short. If Alizarin was going to be like this, she wanted to get away. Still, better not make it look like she was running. She'd have her drink and leave. Alizarin laughed, again with his mouth almost shut. Ianthe could see the faint writhing of dark tendrils between his teeth. "Don't lie to me, dear," he said, saccharine tone making her skin crawl. "I know what you are capable of. I helped you master it." "Lies," Ianthe swallowed, calming her temper. While her mother wouldn't have approved of the insult, she would have approved even less of Ianthe rising to the bait. "What I know, I learned from someone else," she said carefully, "and it is something you will never know." "We'll see about that," Alizarin hummed, raising a hand for the bartender to bring him something. His tight-lipped smile curved across his face. It reminded Ianthe of the thin slice of a shark's fin through the water. Except sharks are creatures that can be understood, that follow the laws of nature. Simple things that eat and swim, not dangerous if you understand them. This thing, Alizarin, is something else. He violated the existence of the world, and it had not come to punish him yet. Another thing that Ianthe hated about him. Was he free from even the retribution of the gods? The bartender brought Ianthe her drink and made eye contact for a moment. Ianthe blinked once and looked down. The bartender stepped away. She was ready, should Alizarin try anything violent. But he wouldn't be so stupid. Alizarin studied her closely. It took all of Ianthe's self-control not to shift uncomfortably in her chair. She stared into space, at the back wall of the bar. "Something is different," Alizarin murmured, words thick through the mass that writhed secretly in his mouth and throat, and twitched one of his fingers on the bar top. Ianthe felt as if she could not move. She tried to turn, look, but couldn't. She was paralyzed, frozen in place. Something poked gently at the corners of her mind, tugging at her thoughts, listening. "No, no, please," Alizarin sighed, raising one eyebrow. "You used to be so open.
You would share your thoughts with anyone.
My thoughts are my own, and are none of your concern. Let me go.
You're hiding something.
Ianthe felt a brief surge of panic, a trapped bird in her chest. She managed to take a breath before she felt her lungs stop.
Tell me,
Alizarin said casually, leaning on the bar top.
What's on your mind?
Ianthe wished she could call out, but no one would notice this, and even if they did, there was a chance no one would stop him. Alizarin was known for being vicious when necessary, and while he would not openly break the terms of the truce, if he caught you outside of Baruni Hakir. The prying grew stronger. Ianthe tried to shut out all of the nimble fingers picking at the loose ends of words drifting through her mind. She could not, would not let him know about... She stopped. He could hear this.
Get out, you filth,
she snarled.
I may be hiding something. I may not. It's not for you to know.
Alizarin paused again and let out a breath, looking down to the bar top, then back up.
Do you intend to stop me from knowing?
He said softly. The tone of voice that warned, the tone that meant if you did not heed his words, you would soon learn why he was captain.
I can't,
Ianthe said,
but she can.
She didn't want to channel. She couldn't hear, not without the proper rituals. But she could reach out and just brush the surface of one goddess's power, enough to startle him into letting her go, perhaps. Enough to put him off. She stretched up for Kalari's lightning. There was something in the way. The souls of the dead, chained to Alizarin. She could sense them roaming around him, tied to the tiny bird cages strung along his belt and tucked into his pockets. She could not reach Kalari. Athe was out of the question, too far away. Could Zoriel help? Her steadiness, her silence, her firm power. No, that would not be useful. Which meant... Don't think, just do it. It was best not to hesitate with Zikal. Ianthe reached out and grazed the edges of where she knew Zikal's power lay in her mind. It was worse than the lightning, less natural, and it made her flinch. It hit Alizarin harder, and he jerked his hands backwards, startled. Ianthe felt the spirits lose hold of her and gasped in a breath of air, trying not to draw attention to herself.
What?
Alizarin snapped, looking down at his own hands. Ianthe glanced over despite herself and saw the skin on his fingertips had paled to a chalky white, the color of life draining out of them. It was the hand he had used to hold her. He looked up, frowning ever so slightly. Ianthe's mind was spinning. That briefest touch of Zikal's presence was enough to exhaust her and scatter her thoughts. She didn't respond to Alizarin, just fished in her pockets for a coin and set it on the bar top next to her half-empty glass. Alizarin stared at his hand. Ianthe stood and left the tavern, striding tall, desperately trying not to stumble. The following day she was summoned. Red and black and gold were the color of the three sisters. The red and black and gold were the robes of the messenger that stood on the dock, waiting for Ianthe to leave the ship. "You're needed," she said quietly, as Ianthe tried to pass her. Ianthe looked at her, stopping in her tracks. "By who?" she asked, even though she already knew. "Mahima Karana," the messenger said, eyes looking respectful to the dock planks as she spoke. "She requests your presence." The eldest of the sisters that held Baruni Hakir, and the most powerful. Ianthe nodded once. "I will come," she said, though she knew it wasn't an option. "Are you to lead me there?" "Yes." The messenger took her through the sprawling streets of the city. The sun was rising. The city's heat had not yet gathered to its sweltering peak, and people were hurrying past, trying to finish what they could before the sun forced them inside. The moisture of the delta and the nearby jungle hung in the air, in the streets where the wind had not reached to stir it. Ianthe couldn't fathom how the messenger in the draped red cloths and headscarf wasn't overheating already. Her own coat felt like it was clinging to her arms. She was used to swifter winds than these. The messenger brought her to the base of a low hill dominated by a set of golden stairs, leading to a vast walled palace. Ianthe followed her up. Past the gate, the messenger stepped aside, gesturing.
"It will continue," she said, and bowed. "It is not my place to go any further."
Ianthe clasped her hands in front of her and rubbed the palm of one with her other thumb, gaze flicking from left to right. She walked forward through the gateway. Beyond lay a carefully tended garden. Here the sun's light was blocked by tall palm trees and wide green leaves splattered with splotches of red and yellow. The shade was cool and a welcome relief from the brutal sun. She kept going, along a white stone pathway, until she came to the entryway to the palace and stepped inside. There was no one in sight, but she knew to keep going, through the pillared entryway into a throne room. The sisters waited. Mahima was in the center, lounging on an intricate cushioned seat draped in silk. Golden chains, so fine they seemed like thread, dripped from her ears and nose, and a swathe of fabric laid over her bunched hair like a veil. Ianthe could see the glimmer of gold bands in these dark tresses. A ruby glittered in the center of Mahima's forehead, the centerpiece of a golden crown that dipped down above the bridge of her nose and dangled smaller rubies just above her eyebrows. Her arms and fingers were covered in heavy gold bracers and rings, so many that she almost seemed to be wearing armor. Her dress was intricately wrapped red silk, thin black lines of embroidery running across it, and a deep black sash with gold thread woven into the pattern in the fringe. Her feet were bare, and adorned with rings and strings of beads that lay across the top and circled around her ankles. Her eyes were hard. Ianthe came to a respectful distance and knelt before the sisters. Mahima looked her over once, and raised a hand to her mouth, as if contemplating something. She glanced to her left. Bamini sat there, draped in silk and gold, an onyx jewel dangling from her crown. She was stunningly, breathtakingly beautiful, graceful and exquisite, every movement carefully calculated to draw attention or lose it. The jewelry shone against her smooth brown skin, reflections glinting in her eyes. Ianthe looked over to her, then down again. She was not supposed to look. Mahima looked to her right. There sat the youngest sister, legs tucked up against her chest, folds of red cloth, not silk, enveloping her small form. She was sharp, and there was a fizzing energy in her eyes and movements that put Ianthe on edge. She did not expect this royal to harm her, but she could not predict what she would do, and that made her nervous. Xavi's crown jewel was a cut topaz, wrapped in wire, dangling on her forehead. Golden powder coated her eyelids and trailed in swirling designs down her cheekbones. She tapped one jeweled claw against the side of her face and looked to Mahima. "Ianthe Kande," Mahima said, her voice low and echoing.
"Yes, Peacebringer Mahima,"
Ianthe said, looking down to the mosaic tile floor. Patterns of white and blue laid out the shape of a lotus's flower beneath her. "You have a quarrel with the man in our city," Mahima said.
"Yes, Peacebringer Mahima, but I would not act on it. I have committed no offense."
"And neither is he, by our laws, which extend only to the body. But he has worked magic in our port against you, and you against him." There was no point in lying. It would only bring punishment. The Peacebringers could, together, rip a pirate's voice from their body, silence them forever. They could steal the life from someone and take it for themselves. They could perform acts of magic that any individual person could not. To go against the sisters was to risk more than a finger, a hand, an arm.
"Yes, Peacebringer."
"Why?"
He wanted to know what I know.
Mahima tapped one finger on her chin again, her rings clinking together softly as she moved. "What do you know that he does not?" You did not keep secrets from the Peacebringers. They knew all, and if they did not know, They would find out. The magic of knowing hung heavy in the air, scent masked in the haze of perfumes that wafted through the throne room.
One of our number is not safe in the harbor, Peacebringers, and if she were to enter, Alizarin would kill her and bind her soul to his ship. He does not know she exists, but he knows that I am hiding something. I do not want him to know.
One of your number, Xavi said from Ianthe's left. She raised an eyebrow. Why did you not say crew?
She is not of our crew, Ianthe said. She is our charge.
Xavi glanced back over to Mahima. Explain. Mahima's eyes could not be resisted.
We killed a mermatron and found she had hidden a chest at the bottom of a bay. Within was her child, which we could not kill. We took the child and raised her. She is old enough to swim beyond our ship, but not old enough to know of Alizarin and his danger. She's outside the bay now, in secret, hiding. Were she to enter, the neutrality would not protect her. Alizarin wants to know of her.
Silence. Outside, a small group of macaws went winging by, their hoarse voices cutting through the wind. The sun lanced off their feathers, and for a moment they gleamed brighter than the sisters' thrones.
Curious,
Bamini murmured, one hand idly stroking one dark sweep of her hair. The golden ring piercing her nose swung gently as she tilted her head ever so slightly, the golden chain that ran from it to her ear jingling quietly.
Why did you not simply leave the youngling to die? We couldn't. We did not mean to kill the mother. We needed to find fresh water, and she would not let us into the cove. We tried to reason with her and tried to sail past her, but she attacked us, and we had no choice but to fight back. We had no idea what she was guarding. It was our fault that she was orphaned, and so it was our responsibility to raise her.
Does she know?
Yes.
And?
She knows. She understands. She does not blame us.
There was silence. Ianthe opened her mouth, shut it again, spoke.
Ababua Ose told me what to do when I asked her, she said. She lives in Kanzaru, east and north in the...
We know of Ababua, Mahima interrupted with a smile. We have spoken with her before. She is wise and knows more than we do of the world. That was a startling admission coming from a peacebringer. Ianthe pulled her head back a little, eyes widening fractionally.
Don't get ideas,
Bamini said casually, examining the fingernails on one hand.
It is because she is far older than anyone understands. We would not ask for a better counselor.
It was not Ianthe's place to ask. She bowed her head down again. Alizarin, Mahima said, is your enemy. You met him yesterday and attacked him. Ianthe felt a flare of anger rise in her chest and tamped it down.
He bound me with his power,
she said, trying to keep the fury out of her voice.
Stopped me from moving, breathing. He was trying to search my mind for Calliope. I could not escape, so I forced him to let go.
By channeling one of the goddesses?
Nay, Peacebringer, I did not channel her. I simply reached out and touched the edge of her power. I could not channel here. I wouldn't.
There was another moment of silence. Motes of dust drifted through the perfumed air, twirling slowly in the beams of light that streamed down from the stained glass over the thrones. Ianthe glanced up. Mahima was looking over to Xavi. Silence. The two were speaking, but not in any way that Ianthe could hear or understand. Your offense is pardoned, Mahima said after a long moment, turning that heavy, dark gaze back on Ianthe. As is his. She wanted them to take offense at what Alizarin had done. She wanted them to throw him out of the port, ban him from Baroni Hakir for the rest of time, refuse him entry ever again. She wanted them to claim him as an enemy of the fleets of the world, someone to be fired at and struck down wherever he went, preyed upon by every ship that had ever docked in the river delta. She wanted the sisters to call the wrath and the wrath of the gods upon him to strike his rotten presence from the world. But, Mahima continued, we are watching him. The magic he uses, the ship he sails, both of these things are... She paused, narrowing her eyes. Bamini glanced over. Not ordinary, she said, picking up where her sister left off. Her narrowed eyes shone in the light that lanced in through the open windows near the roof. They are excessive. The heretic is an insult, and not a veiled one. We are wary of the implication of Elizarine's magic. It feels unnatural to us. He captures the souls of his crew members and uses them to force his ship over the sea, Ianthe said, anger finally forcing her voice out of her. He kills them on purpose and binds them to cages in his pockets and on his belt. The sisters looked her carefully over. Their eyes were quiet, dark, judging her. Ianthe bowed her head again, trying to humble herself again. Peacebringers, she murmured, eyes on the tiled floor. He has sought to kill me in the past. Many here would kill others that dock on these shores, Mahima interrupted. Flat voice was sounding almost bored. This is not new. Rivalries are put aside here. That is the law of this place. He is like every other on our shores. Ianthe swallowed. Understood, she said, and went quiet. The sisters exchanged another glance. What were they thinking? Ianthe focused on the floor, the smooth tiles and white between them, rough with sand pulled from the beach. Still, Mahima said finally, your claims will be investigated. Many gifted captains sail these seas, and his is simply another gift, however vile it may be. You have defended yourself. We have what we need. Go. That was a command. Ianthe stood and bowed to the sisters again. There was no point in thanking them. They hadn't done her a favor, or bidding them goodbye. She didn't need to. She turned and left the throne room. She'd never spoken to the Peacebringers before. She didn't know if the outcome of her meeting was desirable or not, but she was worried about their casual lack of concern given Elizarine's activities. They don't know, she thought, as she hurried down the cream and orange steps and nodded to the assistant who had brought her here, walking fast for the docks. He is far more dangerous than they can understand. She had to stop herself, shaking her head, her thick locks falling into her face. The Peacebringers had been around for far longer than she had. They were blessed with long lives, more so with the lives of those who broke their laws, and thus they had probably encountered worse enemies in their time. Still, no. She had spoken to them. What they did now, she could not control. She went back to the midnight sun. Mikullo found her on board, sitting in the hold on a chair, glowering at the wall where her boots were braced against the boards. Where have you been? He asked. It was noon. The humidity of the delta was shimmering in the air in a thick haze. Ianthe could see it through the window glass. The Peacebringers wanted to speak with me, Ianthe answered, voice a low growl. What did you do? Defended myself. Mikullo's expression changed. Ianthe, what have you done? He said softly. She glanced over, sitting up straighter. No, we're not. We're fine. Nothing happened. It was justified, and nothing that would warrant our expulsion from the port. Elizarine tried to read my mind. I scared him off. That's it. She unfolded her arms and swiveled to face him, lacing her fingers together and leaning on her knees. He tried to what? Pry into my thoughts, Ianthe spat, glowering at the deck boards. He knows we're hiding something. He doesn't know what. He doesn't know about Calliope. Not yet, I think.
But he knows something is hidden, and he knows I desperately don't want him to find it.
She shook her head.
Which will make him all the more determined to do exactly that.
Makullo leaned on the wall, tapping his fingers on the dark wood. He said, pursing his lips. Well, what did the sisters say?
They'll look into it, but they aren't worried by him.
They don't need to be, Makullo muttered.
I don't know if that's true.
What could he do against them? Against the Peacebringers? They would annihilate him. Ianthe let out a breath.
You may think so, she said. But no. You know what he can do. He has only gotten stronger since I left. They should fear him.
A bold statement, and she knew it. Makullo searched her face. Ianthe swallowed, feeling her throat work, thinking of the gray-green tendrils writhing behind Alizarin's clean, white teeth.
We should all fear him.